Alright, so I'm filming this after, I didn't film an intro, but we're working on Mike's Honda Accord Special Edition. It's got 302,000 miles. We just did a full, basically front end suspension rebuild, control arms, ball joints, outer tie rod ends. He had put struts and springs on it prior.
2 weeks ago.
And then I think sway bar end links as well. So this video will kind of walk through how we did all that, and torque specs and our hurdles we had with the ball joint and everything else we ran into. But other than that, pretty straightforward, and everything came together pretty well. So hopefully this will help somebody out. Starting off, what we're going to be replacing in here is our upper control arm here, the lower control arm right there, sway bar end link, tie rod end, and try to get some light in here, the lower ball joint. You can kind of see it. So he's already replaced the spring and strut assembly. So basically we got to remove the entire hub assembly off, undo the axle, brakes, and pull the whole hub assembly off, mainly in order to get the lower ball joint, because we have to get that out and put the new one in, which that's mounted on the hub assembly. So I really don't think there's any first thing to start with. We just kind of start undoing stuff, since we're pulling basically the entire front end apart. So we'll get started. Alright, so Michael's going to be doing most of the work on this. He's going to be pulling the wheel speed sensor first, and then the brake caliper and rotor to get that out of the way. Then we'll go from there. So it's just a couple 10 mil bolts that hold that on. Alright, so a total of 4 bolts and 1 nut.
And there's one more.
Holding that on.
There's one more on the speed sensor.
And then one on the actual sensor itself.
This one's a pain.
Get that guy out of the way. Now Michael's going to pull his brake caliper out of the way.
Brake line's free.
The rotor, which the Hondas of course have the screws holding the rotor in, so be careful not to strip those. That's a very common occurrence.
Yeah.
And make sure, going back together, we'll put anti-seize on those screws.
Back so we don't lose it.
Alright, so 2 screws holding the rotor out. Michael removed the whole caliper as an assembly, so those were 17 millimeter. So with that out, this is where you can kind of pretty much go about where you're going, depending on what you're replacing, or if you're replacing everything like we are. So you could undo the upper control arm, lower control arm, tie rod end. It really doesn't matter what order you go in.
Alright. So what is this? This is 17 on both sides.
Alright, so Michael's pulling the strut fork off and just going to pull the strut just to get out of the way. So it's a 17 that holds the strut fork on.
Yeah. So that was what, 17? Yeah. Okay.
So to make it easier to pull the strut out, he's going to pull the upper control arm. What size was that?
17. Whoops. And we're gonna trash that.
So you're gonna want to put, depending on how old the car is, how many miles are on it, if this stuff's ever been done before, these can be kind of a pain to get out. So we'll soak this in a PV blaster and basically strike the side of the hub assembly here with a hammer, and it should shock this and pop the upper ball joint off of there. Probably got a nice view of the fender on that one. Pulled that. You see how gone that ball joint is. See, I just struck the side of it here with the hammer, and the shock it popped off. Yeah, so he's got aftermarket kit, strut kit on here with bolts, aftermarket bolts. So they're a 13 and a 15. But again, not sure what the factory one might be a different size.
This is for the Monroe quick strut.
Yeah, so the strut assembly is off.
Okay, this is 14.
Like I was about to pull the upper control arm now,
Let me,
which is 14.
let me break it loose with this first. There you go. I think these are still good, but obviously the ball joint's toast.
So we're probably gonna go ahead and blast this axle nut off.
Yeah.
Next, actually, probably should have done that first before we pulled everything else off, but it's all right. But that's a 36 mil socket. We'll go ahead and blast that off with the impact. That way, we don't have to pull the axle, but just got to remove it from the hub. And then we just let it kind of hang there while we remove the lower control arm and the rest of the stuff we're replacing. Okay, with the axle nut out, allows our axle to slide out of the hub there.
There we go.
Pop that and just kind of let it hang out of the way.
Alright, that's good.
Alright, so the lower ball joint, we'll have to do the same way. Strike the side of the lower control arm to shock it, and it should pop the ball joint out.
Go.
Now the hub assembly's out.
Now for the hard part.
That ball joint is toast. That tie rod end is toast.
Yep.
So we'll get to the hub in a minute through the ball joint. We'll go ahead and
Gotta get this.
we'll get the
linkage.
control arm off next.
Yeah.
So you got to pull the sway bar link, end link there.
Yeah.
And then I guess this is a tension rod. Got to pull the 2 bolts there that are connecting to the control arm, and then the control arm bolt back there, and that lower control arm should come off.
Yep. Position that so it's not blinding you.
Okay, so the sway bar end link, it's a 5mm hex inside the threaded portion, and then a 14 nut on the outside. So what I used was 14 wrench and then a 5mm Allen plug on a ratchet, and broke the nut loose with the wrench, and then just worked it with the ratchet and the wrench, and it came off. So we don't have to do the other side because we're replacing both the control arm and this, so it'll just come off with the control arm.
So that's a 17. Yeah, it's too big. Okay, it's out. That was 19. That's it. And I think on the other side we use the impact just to speed it up because it was a pain in the ass to break.
Here, just use the air impact.
Yeah.
Alright, so those two bolts were 19s, holding that in, 17 that holds the back of it in there. And then there's your lower control arm. A little rusty for 300,000 miles, but what do you expect?
Okay, and then the last one was.
And then the last piece that we're pulling
tie rod
be
end.
that outer tie rod end, and it's got a basically like every tie rod assembly. You got a lock nut, and then there's a spot on the tie rod end to put a crescent or a wrench, and then you can just screw it off. Loose.
Yeah.
We actually had to, I just time-lapsed it, but we had to put all this stuff back in because it's better to have something for the wrench to lean against to brace it while you break that lock nut loose. So we went ahead and put in the new lower control arm, the sway bar end link, and the upper control arms in as well. So I have another video on doing a steering rack on a Honda Civic, and I kind of explain how to try and maintain your alignment to an extent, at least get it in the ballpark for when you go get an alignment, because every time you touch your rack or mess with tie rods or something, you definitely want to go get an alignment done. So we're basically going to count the number of turns it takes to get this tie rod off, and then when we screw the new one on, we'll screw it on the exact number of turns it took to take it off, and that should put us in the ballpark of where the tie rod was at.
Okay.
So.
Oops. 18.
18. Okay, so that was 18 turns. The other side was 15. So it's going to take the new one and put it on 18 turns, and then we'll lock it back up. All right, so everything's just kind of hand tight at the moment. We'll come back and torque everything up. Gonna knock the ball joint out next. I do not have the proper tools to do this properly, so this is for all you people that can improvise. Definitely not the correct way to do it, but I'm going to get a 32 mil socket, put on the end of here, and basically knock it out with my 4-pound hammer. And I should be able to knock it out. It's a press fit ball joint. So relocated down here to the shop. Actually got it kind of resting up against this transmission so it doesn't move, but you see hitting it, it's starting to pop out now. Okay, getting closer. I'll switch to, I guess this is an 1 1/8" socket, a little bit skinnier. There it is. Popped out of the fit. So we'll go ahead and clean that up a little bit, and then we'll hammer the new one back in.
Faces.
No.
Jesus Christ. Is it down far enough to get the clip on?
Yep.
Looks like it.
Looks like it. Okay, so hammer net wasn't really working on this, which don't really recommend doing anyway, but we ended up getting a ball joint tool from Advanced Auto, but really this tool isn't really set up for the way the Accord's ball joint works, because a lot of ball joints go up into the hub. They're not actually part of the hub, unlike on this one. So we kind of had to use the C-clamp backwards, because really the C-clamp should be pushing from this end. But managed to use a socket as my my pushing piece here. I had a 1 1/16" impact socket, and then we used, Michael, where's that other piece?
We use this.
We used this guy, which was closed off on the bottom as our push off point there, and then just ran the impact with the C-clamp, and it pushed it in. So it's a good way to do it if you have these tools. I'm sure there's like a Honda special tool that probably works much better. But that ended up working. We got the ball joint in.
This is all we had in the area.
Yeah. So now we'll go ahead and put our snap ring. If you see that little groove, the snap ring goes in there. And then put this thing back in the car and start slapping it together.
Yep.
All right, so got our C-clip snap ring pliers. Go ahead and put this on this ball joint. Oops. That's it. Seat it all the way around. And that's our new ball joint.
22.
Alright, so Mike's going to walk through the torque specs here. Other way, bud. So where are you torquing the upper control arm first?
They're called flange nuts on the upper control arm. At least that's what the diagram from Honda says. Flange
So he's
nut.
got the Honda diagram. I'll link it in the description. It's got torque specs on it. So these are going to be 22 foot-pounds.
The 14 millimeter socket. Okay, so they're already. Okay, so those are good. And it should be.
Okay, so next is doing the,
They're
I call
called
the tension rod bolts.
self-locking nut.
That's
Self-lock. Oh no, never mind. Self-locking bolt. Yeah, on the tension rod.
Tension rod bolts. So the tension rod bolts, 19 mil. They're 72 foot-pounds.
76.
76. Correction.
Okay.
A little bit of movement out of the inner bolt on the lower control arm. That's 40 foot-pounds, 17 millimeter. So Michael just got that torqued. Alright, so we're setting these at 28 foot-pounds. There you go.
Okay.
You in the bottom?
Let me take a. Yeah, it's seated. Okay. Did I? Okay.
Alright, so the 14 mil on the back of the strut there, he's tightening to 37, you said?
No, the top is 32.
So the back was 14 mil and he's doing 32 foot-pounds on that.
Thought I had an in one. Okay.
And then the bottom is going to be 47 foot-pounds.
Okay. Alright. Here. Oh, no. It's reverse. Okay, so 32, 32. Okay, so 40, 32, 32. This is 17 millimeters. This is 16 millimeters. Okay. And this is a 19 millimeter, and this should be 40 foot-pounds of torque. Yeah, 40. Okay.
Okay, so the new kit comes with new cotter pins too for all these bolts. So you just gotta make sure your holes, we torque them, but you may have to move it a little more, like that's not directly lining up with that hole. So you may have to go a little over torque to get the hole to line up so you put your cotter pin in. All right, so we sucked up the spindle nut. It's a 36 mil, and the torque value on that is 180 foot-pounds. So we'll set the torque wrench up.
Yeah. Here we go.
Good.
Good?
Yep.
You still gotta knock that piece in.
There we go. Okay, so Michael got everything else tight. Our upper control arm's tight and torqued correctly. Upper ball joint torqued correctly. Our inner tie rod, or not, sorry, not inner, tie rod end, or outer tie rod end torqued correctly. The lower ball joint, got the rotor with the screw back in with anti-seize on it so it doesn't lock up. And basically just reverse process of how we pulled stuff apart. He's got the lines all back in and tight. Next we'll throw the wheel on, and then he can take it and go get a front end alignment, and we should be good